Good evening and welcome to The Story. I'm Evan Watson. We begin tonight with a look at election transparency, how some counties are working to make what's frankly a pretty boring process full of checks and balances even more accessible to the public, and why that still might not be enough for some skeptics. It's our big story tonight. Counties in Washington have spent millions of dollars since the last presidential election to add even more transparency to the voting and elections process. With Election Day 2 weeks from today, the question now is, will it matter? Investigator Chris Ingalls from our sister station King 5 in Seattle reveals how Washington Republicans laid groundwork to challenge elections even before the first ballot is counted.
For our test this afternoon, our logic and accuracy test, the process is really here to validate that the vote counting equipment is programmed accurately and it's counting votes as it is supposed to.
A test run earlier this month at King County Elections to verify that ballot sorting and counting equipment is up to the job.
What you will see us scanning today are test ballots, not ballots returned by actual voters. So that's what this test is about.
This logic and accuracy test, as it's called, is a long-time pre-election ritual. But the November 5th election will see some firsts, including new levels of transparency.
We're providing this radical level of transparency.
King County Elections Director Julie Wise says radical transparency means allowing more observers, like those who attended the logic and accuracy test. She's doubled the number of watchdogs from political parties, candidates, and the public. They'll work in shifts of 12 observers allowed on the floor at any given time.
We've already trained 70 observers so far. I bet we'll beat a record of 300 unique different observers coming in for this election process.
Also, a record number of temporary employees this election season.
In typical presidential elections, we've had about 500 to 600 temporary employees. In this election, we're hiring 800 temporary employees.
And 85 security cameras, plus more live streaming cameras on King County's election website to put vote counting transparency a click away for the public.
So there are more cameras live streaming, and they're already up and running 24/7 now until the vote is certified in late November.
Throughout the facility, we've installed floor to almost ceiling glass so people can look into all of our processing spaces.
In neighboring Snohomish County, security and transparency, with large windows so observers can see everything, came with a big price tag for this brand new election center.
Ballpark, what was the cost of all this?
Yeah, so we had a budget of about $8.5 million.
In the next county to the north, Skagit, they haven't spent millions, but they do have a new, larger ballot processing area as well.
Seeing how the process worked is helpful. It helps alleviate any misinformation, intentional or unintentional.
In Skagit County, the Republican Party has aggressively challenged voter registrations.
This voter registration challenge hearing is called to order.
Until recent years, a rarely used law that allows citizens to trigger investigations of individual voters.
Research undertaken demonstrated that the voter does not currently reside at the resident's address.
This Republican Party representative has challenged the registrations of 57 Skagit voters this year. The Skagit County auditor upheld 34 of those challenges and kicked them off the voter rolls. That's 34 cases out of nearly 90,000 registered voters in Skagit County. All 34 were people who moved but didn't update their address where their ballot is sent.
It might not be caught, the voter doesn't let us know that they've moved, things like that. But overall, no fraud or any malicious intent that we've been able to find.
No fraud, but that has not stopped Skagit Republican Party Chair Bill Bruck from making those claims.
Our elections and our Constitution have been circumvented and subjugated.
That was Bruck 3 years ago, but he continues to peddle stolen election conspiracies on the party's website. Bruck and other party officers did not respond after we visited the Republican Party offices in Mount Vernon last week.
Hello?
In our fraud crusade investigations 2 years ago, we exposed that their claim that 14 dead people who voted in 2020 weren't true.
Check citizenship. Citizenship should be checked.
They falsely said that this Mount Vernon man was an illegal immigrant who voted.
Very disrespectful to who I am as a person.
It's fraudulent.
And that this lifelong Skagit resident was incompetent to vote.
It's wrong for anybody to decide that I'm incompetent to vote.
A major concern in our state is who gets registered to vote and how they're registered to vote, and how those databases of registered voters are managed and maintained.
Representative Jim Walsh is the chair of Washington State's Republican Party.
So after years of the criticism which you just leveled, point me to the one case where there's corruption or there's incompetence.
There may not be a smoking gun. You know, abusive behavior may look like legitimate ballots. So it's very hard to prove.
Republicans want to eliminate Washington's mail-in ballots and return to in-person voting. That leaves them primed to challenge the results of upcoming elections.
Definitely the tensions, I think, around elections have grown over the last, 4 or 5 years.
Aren't you worried that no matter what you do, people are not going to believe the results that you release in this election?
I wouldn't lie to say that it's devastating. I mean, it really is. And I believe that if we provide this level of access, that we will get more people to trust in the system and to believe in it.
A theory that will be tested starting election night, November 5th. Chris Ingles, King 5 News.
We want to know what questions you have about the upcoming election. Again, we're just 2 weeks out. What candidates or ballot measures do you want to know more about? Or do you have questions about Portland's new ranked choice voting? Right now, we're working on a segment about how the results will be reported on election night, what your expectations should be. Anything and everything. Send it to the story at kgw.com or leave a voicemail at 503-226-5090. Now to a resolution to a tragic story we first shared with you here on The Story 3 years ago. A Multnomah County judge has approved a wrongful death settlement in the case of a woman who died on the street during the 2021 heat dome. Ashlin Maddox was one of nearly 100 Oregonians who died during the heat dome in 2021 as temperatures rose to 110 degrees and higher. Having battled epilepsy and multiple strokes, Maddox lived in an adult care facility in southeast Portland. That day, she relied on a medical transport service called Ride to Care to bring her home from a medical appointment. A neighbor's camera video showed the driver dropping off Maddox at the curb in front of the house next door. The company says the driver followed protocol. That's where Maddox asked to be dropped off. But she never went inside, walking in the other direction. 2 hours later, neighbors found her unresponsive just 50 feet from her home.
There's a lot of phlegm coming out of her mouth.
Okay.
I'd like to get her out of this heat.
Oh, okay, ma'am. Are you with her right now?
Well, there's about 2-3 people with her right now.
Maddox died of hyperthermia at 36. Her mother, Cheryl Hollins, comes to Portland each year on her daughter's birthday to grieve.
Don't worry, I always be there for you, Ash. Through the good times and the bad times. I'm here. Your mama's here. In Jesus' name, amen, amen.
Hollins filed a wrongful death lawsuit against a collection of organizations that make up Ride to Care. The parties agreed to a $375,000 settlement, and a judge signed off on it just last week. We caught up again with Hollins. The video call didn't have the best connection, but she shared how everything is still painful.
Well, for one thing, I'm glad that we don't have to go to trial, so I have to live it all over again. And I just want to get it over and done and closed. I was praying that my mother would hold up to see justice had been served for my daughter, her beloved granddaughter. And I want them to pay because it shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened. And I don't want it to happen to nobody else.
Maddox's death triggered investigations into both the ride service that dropped her off and the adult care home where she lived. Investigators looked into whether the driver or staff neglected Maddox that day and if that contributed to her death. The final result, the evidence was inconclusive. Still ahead, the doors are closing on the famed hexagonal buildings of Sherry's Cafe and Pies. We talked to a worker who says it was pretty obvious things weren't going well. The drastic steps she says she had to take when The Story returns. The Portland Public School District has spent months focused on phones, all to see if there should be a specific or more stringent district-wide cell phone policy. Should students have them in school at all, and when would it be okay for them to use them? We've talked about this here on The Story before. Two Portland high schools, Grant and Cleveland, are requiring students to use Yonder pouches this year. They're locking magnetic neoprene cases that prevent students from using their phones from bell to bell. It's a drastic change, but is it one that PPS wants to take district-wide? It's looking increasingly likely that PPS will end up with a system that allows for all sorts of different phone policies across its schools and classrooms, with the general rule that phones should be off and away most of the time. That's not too dissimilar from what's in place right now. PPS surveyed more than 2,000 students about their devices. A strong majority said either their school or their classrooms have current policies about phone use. And about half of those students said they're expected to keep their phones off and away. About a third of the students said teachers collect their phones in each classroom. And fascinatingly, just 12% of the Grant and Cleveland students who are using Yonder pouches this year said that would be their preferred phone use policy, showing that most students think Yonder is too restrictive. Nearly every student said they should be allowed to use their phones during lunch, and most want to use them during passing time and during before and after school activities. One Lincoln High School student explained to school board members why she wants the access to her phone outside of class.
We do walk around a lot, and we're very close to downtown, and we have a really huge homeless problem. My mom does not let me go off campus because of that, and I think that having my phone, gives her a little extra security, and me too, to be able to walk off campus.
So what next? The school board has yet to vote on a phone policy, and there are differing opinions on the board if phones should be off and away all day or just during class time. We'll see if they come to a consensus. So here's my take on this. With the introduction of Yonder pouches to Grant, Cleveland, and Beaumont Middle this year, PPS has already allowed schools to vary wildly in how they police cell phones. That's a fascinating decision. The current PPS draft proposal would allow that to continue. Administrators could make additional restrictions if they so choose. And the Oregon Department of Education is working on a statewide student phone policy of its own, with the plan to share that this fall. Who knows what wrinkle that might add. In my opinion, uniformity and consistency would go a long way here. I believe most people, students, parents, and educators alike, can agree that cell phones are harmful and distracting. Research backs that up. The U.S. Surgeon General connected phones and social media to a youth mental health crisis earlier this year, calling for limited phone use in schools. But if every school or even every class has a different phone policy, that's going to be real tough to manage. Teachers have already told me they're exhausted having to take on phones themselves, and it's too much to handle. Most importantly, I can't see how that creates an equitable learning environment for all students if different schools and classrooms vary. Students are clear they want access to their phones during lunch and extracurriculars, and for me that does make sense. But if the district could settle on a consistent and manageable phone policy for all schools and all class times, I would see that as the best way forward.
It was a great place to stop and get a good warm meal and some pie. But times change.
It appears to be the end of an era for local favorite restaurant chain Shers. Less than 2 months after we reported several of their locations are shutting down across Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, the Beaverton-based family-style restaurant chain has seemingly run into even more trouble. When we last checked in, Shers was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Multiple vendors, such as a construction company and a plumbing company, said Shers owes them money. A property owner in Bend sued the Shers management company for unpaid rent, claiming they racked up more than $150,000 in unpaid bills. Charlton Marketing, a small Portland ad agency, claims Shers owed them more than $100,000 for a marketing campaign last year. And on top of all that, the state of Idaho has 6 active tax liens against the company for more than $200,000 in unpaid taxes. Over the weekend, Shers abruptly closed all of its Oregon locations. It was confirmed in a statement sent from the parent company of Shers Management Corporation to the Oregon Lottery yesterday. Even their website appears to be down right now following the weekend closures. Despite state records showing nearly $35 million in video lottery sales in 2023. Former manager of the Shers by the airport, Deb Molina, says the writing was on the wall.
Take money, go grocery shopping. For this location, that was tough because, that's like taking my car to the grocery store and buying $2,500 worth of food and getting it in there. I mean, we don't have trucks. We don't have, I'd have to ask employees to help and, bye-bye. And, but that's what we've been doing. They told us to turn off lottery. Then they told us to turn it back on. So we went through the day, but then on Saturday, they would not allow us to buy food. And at that point, how do you open a restaurant when you have no eggs, no hash browns, no bacon, no ham, no cheese? The employees have been calling in sick. That's making them sick. I've been sitting in my office back there, and the garbage there's only a piece of plywood separating my office from that garbage. It's horrible. I feel like I've said this many times. We've been in hospice for months, and it was just dragged out to the very end.
Molina says communication from corporate on the closures was near non-existent, and they made it her responsibility to inform the entire staff they were no longer employed by the company.
I think the worst part for me is that they left me to tell everybody. You know what I'm saying? They could have at some point said, "Hey, we tried, but it didn't work, and we're closing the doors." Instead, they just said, "Shut it down," and now people are standing there going, "Hey," and I'm saying, "You don't have a job anymore. I'm so sorry." It was horrible. He said, "You are no longer needed." Because I offered. I said, do you need me to come back, clean out the building? What is my next step for you? Because that's how we all are, even in the face of all of this. And he said, nothing. So now I'm sort of like, all this devotion for what, But it is what it is, and we're all going to go on.
So far, we haven't seen any filings in bankruptcy court, and it's still not clear if any locations are still open outside of Oregon. Management did not respond when we reached out for comment. Shers has been around for 46 years in Oregon. For a lot of you, we know it was a mainstay, maybe a warm meal with family or a late night slice of pie with friends when you were young. We want to hear your favorite memories at Shers. Tell us all about it and email thestory@kgw.com or leave a voicemail 503-226-5090. Still ahead, a new lab at Oregon State University. It helps wine growers learn critical information about their grapes after they're exposed to wildfire.
The winemaker needs to know is the information. How much is in there?
How the new lab is helping speed up the process after the break. Oregon State University has a new lab to test grapes impacted by wildfire smoke. Research that's become more prevalent in recent years, seeing the expansion of wildfires in our area. This lab is meant to speed up a critical process, giving winemakers an answer in days instead of weeks. Devin Haskins has the story.
We're doing a lot of high throughput stuff.
On the campus of Oregon State University.
Number one, it's just a really cool looking lab, and this is where like the nerdy side of me kind of comes out.
A former storage unit, now a state-of-the-art science lab testing grapes impacted by wildfire smoke.
What happened in 2020 was we had a lot of samples, basically all through the valley, all over Oregon, that needed to be tested, and we didn't have enough testing facilities.
This new wine smoke lab, lobbied by the wine industry and partly funded with $2.7 million from the state, will give winemakers a quicker return on the testing of their grapes to see how bad the smoke really was for them.
The first thing that the winemaker needs to know is the information, how much is in there. Second thing the winemaker needs to know is how much their grapes are, what is the threshold of impact for them? And that can take a lot of experimentation, and it also takes a lot of information. We know that not all smoke is equal.
Cole Serrato is an assistant professor at Oregon State's Department of Food Science and Technology. He says his lab can determine the type of smoke and how each different varietal is impacted, and then pass that information on to the winemaker.
What the winemakers really need and what we're able to provide is that information. And the more information these winemakers have year over year, the more predictive power they are going to have in being able to tell if their wine has been smoke impacted.
When the grapes are sent into the OSU lab, they're first made into wine. Juice from the smashed up grapes are placed in a jar, and then the process is sped up using a warm water bath. Researchers at OSU then test that wine for the different smoke compounds. Oregon State professor Elizabeth Tomasino.
They are affected differently. And for example, Pinot Noir is quite impacted compared to Cabernet Sauvignon, and Petit Verdot in particular is just gross. So we're trying to figure out why, because if we can figure out why, we might be able to recommend different winemaking practices so it's not as much of a problem.
Each test costs around $400 to do, and they say they can get the results done in a matter of days instead of weeks. They also said that they're able to push out about 4 times as many tests in a day than they previously could before the lab was built. In Corvallis, I'm Devin Haskins, KGW News.
Winemaking, of course, a big industry in our area, and the effects of those seen not only in the consumer's level, but the manufacturers as well. That's the end of our show tonight. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be back with you tomorrow night here on The Story. And you can find us wherever works for you and stream The Story on your own schedule. Download the free KGW Plus app, available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. There you can not only just watch live, but catch up on various stories we've had, investigations that we've aired, other series that we've put on, all available there for you on Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV, on the KGW Plus app.